Hey everyone. So I have no idea what happened there. Do you guys hear me at all? I um I literally have no clue what just happened. So, let me go back to my live and yeah, so okay, you guys are seeing me then. You can hear me. So, yeah, you guys can hear and see me, everyone? Okay, yes. I have no idea what happened. 10-4. Excellent. Guys, yeah, there's been a driver issue with my PC and it locks up. And this, I'm using the camera, the microphone on my camera. My microphone has stopped working again. So, hey, Marek, welcome, Nicodemus. Yeah, I'm so sorry about all the drama. Every time I have all these technical glitches, not sure why. Apologies from Thunderous, because Nicodemus, that's very funny. Um, Apologies from Thunderous. He has the flu. So he unfortunately is not able to be here tonight. He and I have said we will do something next week. Um, so tonight's topic is slavery in Britain and the whole issue of reparations. Ishan Shah, welcome. Hello there. Nicodemus, welcome. Marek, uh, Consciendo el Islam, welcome. Zahar, if, when I see Jay and Lloyd, yeah, you know what? I should talk to Jay again. Um, yeah, I'm really sorry. So everything was fine a few minutes before I tested, and yeah, it just um, maybe I need to reinstall. It's time to reset my computer. Okay, now that you all can hear me, let me sort of begin without delay. Tonight is not expected to be a lengthy discussion. This is a shorter version. I'm trying to plan for shorter discussions on some issues so that it's not like a really long, in-depth, but to introduce a topic and allow for room for discussion and further exploration over time. Um, AI replacing God? I have no idea. AI is good, but not that good. Okay, so the whole thing. Let me go back here. I need to present. So I need to share my screen. Screen two. So Britain owes no slavery reparations. Let's start to that. You guys know me for someone who brings up all of these interesting topics and says very controversial and very blunt things. So the aim here is to discuss propaganda versus history and the law, what the law actually says about this. So, right, let me. Britain also banned the evil practice of sati needed also window burning. Yes, so we're going to mention a few of these things. So this is more of an overview, an introduction. It's about 20 slides long. All right. So what we have here on the bottom are just a few, and if you go online and have a search, you're going to find there are a handful of these ads that you can find of people who are very much against slavery, who are organizing against slavery. Now, it would be really nice if someone can show me from the same time period or before, how Islam abolished slavery, how Muslims worked to abolish slavery. Because I know we've got Daniel Pikachu saying that, well, slaves were treated so much better in Islam. There's these laws that describe how well slaves need to be treated in Islam. So Islamic slavery is really, really good, and it's perfectly moral and fine. And of course, you've got the really wise people filled with the hikmah who want to tell us that Daniel Pikachu will shatter you and destroy you in a debate, Lloyd. That's why you're afraid of Daniel Pikachu, because he will tell you the truth about the Sharia. Well, Daniel happens to agree with all the nasty things about Sharia that I say, oddly enough. Okay, let's have a read through this. The abolition of the slave trade in Britain. Right. So this is from the BBC. It's an article in the BBC and some key points. From the 770s in Britain, a movement developed to bring the slave trade to an end. This is known as the abolitionist movement. So this was the work of politicians, ordinary men and women, and also there was the testimony of formerly enslaved people, and they spread the message of just the horror of slavery and led people to call for the abolition of slavery. This went to the government, went into Parliament. Britain took some major steps. They spent untold money. They lost soldiers. They devoted up to a third of their navy, the largest fleet in the world at the time, specifically for the purpose of abolishing slavery. And I believe they only paid off the debt that they incurred in about 2010, so about 12 years ago. So the world owes Britain a debt. In 1807, the British Parliament passed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act. This ended the buying and selling of enslaved people within the British Empire. Now, it did not protect those already enslaved. Many slavers continued to trade illegally. But of course, just like there are laws against killing people, people still tend to die in murders because, well, criminals will criminalize, right? So, yeah, thank you, CK. Yeah, indentured slavery still happens. So, yeah. Now, hundreds of thousands of people remained enslaved. It took a further 30 years of campaigning before slavery was abolished in all of the British colonies, right? But Denmark was apparently the very first nation to abolish slavery within its lands, within any lands that it controlled. And then Britain came on board. Now, this is 1807. This is very, very early, right? So Britain very proudly took the lead ultimately in the abolition of slavery. Let's continue. Now, very few people realize the very first legal slave owner in America was a black man by the name of Anthony Johnson. And he went to court to demand that a freed slave, a slave who had been freed, had to be transferred to him for life. This freed slave, this free man was by the law, because this black guy went to court and says, I demand that slave was given to him, and this man died in slavery. This guy here. So the fascinating story of Anthony Johnson, the black man who was the first to own a slave in the US, and he was the first slave owner in the US by a lawsuit. So yeah, there was something like 10,000 black slave owners or something like that, or blacks in the US owned 10,000 slaves. But have a look at it, have a look through the history, and you'll discover that black people maybe not so squeaky clean when it comes to the whole issue of slavery. So it's something that they should be aware of. Right, let's have a look here. This is the magazine Dawn. This is March 25, 2023. So this is only three days ago. And this is the Tribune, March 25, 2023. Interesting. So these are all just 3 days ago. Addressing Pakistan's modern slavery problem. And so, okay, so this one was published. It's a reprint of an article from October 16th, 2017. An ILO report released last month has estimated that more than 40 million people are victims of modern slavery today. That's more people than were victims of the slave trade in the 1800s. Of these, 25 million are engaged in forced labor, and the other 15 million are victims of forced marriages. Now, one could ask oneself, where are these forced marriages happening? This is something that's worth looking into. Are these forced marriages happening in Denmark? Copenhagen? Are these forced marriages happening in Oxford? Are these forced marriages happening in, I don't know, Tierra del Fuego? We should find out. Now, the rage, exactly, Tony, the rage is aimed towards slavery of the past, right? And it's called grooming gangs. Patty, yes, it's called grooming gangs, isn't it? There must be a link there. Anthony must have been a Democrat, Ishan. Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, so now notice there is also a gender and age dimension. So it says here 71% of modern slavery victims are women and girls, while 1 in 4, 25%, are children. Now, this is a much longer article. I'm not going to go through the entire article, but of course, feel free to go and find it, Addressing Pakistan's Modern Slavery Problem. Right. So one of the other countries, of course, is India. That was mentioned earlier, and that is true. So we have a major slavery problem in Pakistan. Pakistan is a Muslim country. And as you all know, as we've all been told many, many times, Muhammad abolished slavery. No, Muhammad freed a couple of slaves here and there. Muhammad also owned, traded, and had sex with slaves. Aisha owned slaves. Ali owned slaves. Umar, Abu Bakr, Uthman, all of them owned and traded and were given and sold slaves. So slavery is sunnah in Islam. Will any Muslim step forward and tell me that they will denounce Muhammad's ownership of slavery, which has made slavery sunnah in Islam, will they denounce Muhammad's ownership and trading of slaves? Will you do so right now? And the answer, as we know, is no, you will not. How many slaves did Jesus own? Well, 0. How many slaves did Muhammad own? Well, dozens at least, right, that we know of. So Pakistan is home to the world's 3rd largest slave population. So at least 40 million people worldwide are estimated to be trapped in modern slavery today, more than ever before, as poverty, conflict, and crisis fuel the growing global slave trade. Now notice, Pakistan, home to the world's 3rd largest slave population, only India and China have more. It says here, only India and China have more slaves. Now, of course, we all know that India and China are the world's worst polluters. Who do they blame? Well, if you live in London, England, or if you live in America, they blame you. Yes, because you may only blame white people who are responsible for less pollution than the people of India and China. Does Greta Thunberg protest against the Chinese? No, that would be racist. Does Greta Thunberg protest against Indian pollution? No, that would be racist, right? Facts are racist, as we all know. Moving on. Modern day slavery in Pakistan. So, courting the law, raising awareness, and increasing accountability, Pakistan's first legal news and analysis portal. So, I'm assuming these guys know what they're talking about. Modern day slavery in Pakistan. Human slavery, once native to developing and underdeveloped nations. Oh, it doesn't say only to America or only to Britain. It says, oh, nations, okay, has now evolved into a global issue of modern-day slavery, with numbers estimated to be 40 million in 2016 as per research conducted by the International Labour Organization and the Walk Free Foundation. The League of Nations Slavery Convention of 25 September 1926 described slavery as the status or condition of a person over whom any or all of the powers attaching to the right of ownership are exercised. Well, yeah. So it further defines slave trade in the following words. Now, I recommend that you go and have a look at this, Courting the Law, right? Modern day slavery in Pakistan. Have a look. But this is a real issue, and this is a Muslim country. And I find it so strange that the religion of peace has this slavery problem, right? So Ishan says, my state Goa, I've been to Goa, as well as northeastern states in India and Kerala. I've been to Kerala. Well, the best place to live in India is also the most Christian place of India. Well, yeah. So let's see. Let's see if I've missed anything. Okay. So lying by omission is the leftist way now. There's never been a slavery abolition movement within Islam. There's never been a slavery abolition. Muslims will try and lie to me and say, well, Muhammad freed the slaves. No, he freed some slaves, a couple of slaves here and there. Slavery is legal in Islam. It's legal in the Sharia. It is perfectly legal, right? Abolition of slavery came out of Christianity and Western values. Slavery is legal in Islamic law today in the Sharia and in the fiqh. Muhammad was a slave owner and slave trader. So it is sunnah and it is legal. And remember, if it is legal in Islam, it is moral, right? So therefore it is moral. There's nothing wrong. You speak to Daniel Pikachu and he'll tell you it's perfectly fine. His companions, right, his children and wives owned slaves. Muhammad's whole family, his companions, were slave owners. So slavery is part and parcel of the founding members of Islam. The Islamic slave trade is still active today, 1,400 years later. Pakistan is a major slavery hub. Leftists are raging hypocrites. Leftists are okay with slavery when black people do it. Now, who remembers this little movie here? I did not go watch it, but I've watched dozens of discussions on it, hours worth of discussion on it, where they took this movie, The Woman King, and they discussed the Dahomey in Africa. And the Dahomey were major slave traders. They were a major slave trading nation. The king made his wealth, the country made its wealth from capturing and trading slaves, selling slaves. And they try to, in this movie, misrepresent the facts. And in fact, the lead actress left the movie because when she got the script, she was first going to do the movie. Then when she read the script and discovered They were lying because she went online to check about the Dahomey and discovered the Dahomey were major slavery advocates. They were fighting against the abolition of slavery. She walked away from the movie. And this movie misrepresents the entire history of what these African slave traders were about. These people trafficked in slavery for a long time. Now, we also know that leftism teaches hatred of self and hatred of Western values. Now, leftism, weird lefties, ignore, okay? They aid and they abet atrocities, depravity, and immorality. We don't have to go into that today, but yeah, we all know that, what leftism has enabled lately. So let me see. Let's look at the religion of slavery. So here we've got, you guys might figure out what's going on here, right? What do you think of this handsome, strong black slave, O prophet? Half of the price for you. Handsome, but he will be guarding my harem. No problem. And he pulls away this, and well, yeah, it's a sale. So the prophet says, okay, yeah, I'll buy this slave. I'll buy this guy. Let's have a look here. Anas reported that a person was charged with fornication with the slave girl of Allah's messenger. So Momo wasn't having fornication with the slave girl. Some other guy did it. A slave did it. Thereupon Allah's messenger said to Ali, go and strike his neck. Go and cut off his head, in other words. Ali came to him and he found him in a well, making his body cool. Ali said to him, come out. And as he took hold of his hand and brought him out, he found that his sexual organ had been cut. Okay, fascinating. Hadrat Ali refrained from striking his neck. He came to Allah's apostle and said, Allah's messenger, he has not even the sexual organ with him. I'm not certain how many slaves Jesus or, the apostle Mark or James or had castrated, but I'm willing to bet it's about 0. Whereas, yeah. So this is in Da'if Muslim, book 37, hadith 6676. So I think this gives us an insight into Islam and, yeah, the practices of Islam and Muslims. Now, this talk that I'm going to give, the whole discussion was based on a talk by Raif Hadel Manku. That's him over here. He's well known from discussions on the BBC and especially also on the New Culture Forum. He's a really intelligent historian, very smart guy, great speaker. And Raif is an author, he's a broadcaster, and he's a historian. And he specializes in British institutions like the monarchy and also the Commonwealth realms. He's a well-known commentator in national and international media, from the BBC to ABC. He's a trustee of the Royal Canadian Heritage Trust and a senior fellow at the New Culture Forum think tank. And the topic today is colonialism and empire, and Raif being, from India, basically, his family is, descended. He speaks as a child of empire, and he says so in this talk that he gives, which is really fascinating. So let's look at the woke, grift, and tort law. San Francisco Reparations Committee proposes $5 million to each eligible black person. This is going to cost billions, if not trillions. Yeshua's Yahweh says, yeah. He says, I saw his latest speech. He smashed it. He did. He was brilliant. Yeah. And this is going to cost an untold fortune and bankrupt the economy of California, which is already bankrupt, right? So they want to pay each eligible black person $5 million. So Da'if Muslim isn't a good source of knowledge right now. Yeah. So let's see. Always said rather have an owner as a slave in USA than Arabic through Africa as an African for the reason of castration. Yeah, that was horrible. I mean, that was horrifying. I mean, think about it. Where are the black slaves that went to Arabia, right? You had 350,000 slaves go to North America, and now you've got over 13 million. You had something like up to 18 million slaves go to Arabia. Where are they? Where are they? Seriously, if you have the same multiple of growth 100 times, you should have like 1 billion people in Saudi Arabia today who are black. Where are they? Well, they were castrated, they were killed, and yeah, I mean, it's that simple. Have heard of this book. Have you read the book by John Azuma from Ghana in his book, The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa? No, I've not, but it has been recommended to me, and I drop it in the comments later, please, because it's actually, I should have a look at that. I've heard it's really good. So yeah. Dragon says men all castrated, and yes, that is unfortunate. I mean, yeah. Let's continue. California reparations efforts eyeing $5 million payments in restitution. Efforts in San Francisco and Palm Springs highlights racial inequities. Okay, great and well. So, in recent months, we've seen the issue of slavery and colonialism expand from woke campuses into mainstream. That's the UK and now in America. California now wants to award $5 million to descendants of slaves, bankrupting their economy in the process. From Barbados to Jamaica, prominent Caribbeans are calling for Britain to pay reparations for slavery and the consequences of colonialism. Now, if this were 1807 or 1833, we might consider the merits of the claim because slavery was rife at the time, although it was in its decline, because the victims of slavery would have been alive and would have been deserving of damages. But now we are 200 years later. It's not 1807, it's not 1907, it's not even 2007, as Rafe says in his talk, right? Over 2 centuries have passed since Britain led the world as the very first empire in history to abolish slavery. But you know what? It's not okay to be white. Ask any leftist, right? Ask anyone who votes for BLM, right? You can say it's okay to be black, right? It's okay to be anything but white. So unfortunately, they are shaming people for something that they should be proud of. You can't say, well, hold on, we need to celebrate white culture for having abolished slavery. Not allowed. Okay, so, and Tony says, and funny how almost no one talks about the Afro-Arabs. Yeah, well, let's see. He says in Iraq, Afro-Arabs still suffer much poverty and discrimination, but modern-day moralists do not care. Yes, they are hypocrites. Thank you very, very much. Polski bombowiec, sorry, I was going to say drie in Afrikaans, good grief. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so Kasike says, speaking of slavery in the Caribbean, what about the Irish slaves? Funny that Ireland never says anything what Africans do. Yes, that would be, excuse my French here, but black fragility, because people love talking about white fragility. Hey, maybe we should talk about black fragility. I don't know. So I'm kind of happy to offend everyone if it's true. When you bring up the book White Cargo, the BLM Go Quiet, there were more white slaves in Africa. There were more white slaves taken from Europe to Africa than there were slaves taken from Africa to North America. Let's be very honest about that. So yeah. Black Americans were given an option to leave for Africa, Liberia specifically, but they all chose to stay in the USA. Yes, that is true, Ishan. But also, of course, Liberia turned into a mess because, well, yeah. Okay, so Britain, remember, led the world as the first empire in history to abolish slavery. The right of reparations died long ago because, legally speaking, reparations are fundamentally about matters of what is called tort law, T-O-R-T, tort law. Now, it's really just about the money. So the purposes of damages or restoration or reparation is to restore the victim, in this case the slave, to the position they were in before the damage occurred. That is tort law. If you suffered some kind of harm, you get reparations, some kind of damages, financial compensation to refund you so that you have restitution. The problem is you have to be the victim. You can't come 200 years later and say, well, my great, 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 great grandfather, from 221 years ago, well, he was a slave and therefore I need money now. I need $5 million. Unfortunately, there are legal implications here and there are other practical considerations. Right. Now, we'll discuss a little bit of that. Now, only the victim, under the law, under tort law, only the victim can receive damages, not their descendants. So it's possible that if you die right now, and then your family might be able to get compensation, but not 200 and something years later. So your descendants are not eligible for this. Okay, that's the law of the land. So they will literally be violating the Constitution and the law of the land because they want a little bit of money, because they're greedy. Now, I can legitimately claim, coming from South Africa, that my forebears came there as slaves, right? So, I mean, where do I put in my claim for my $5 million? So 6 or 7 generations separate those alive today from their British Empire slave ancestors. So 19th century slaves suffered genuine indignity. But how does one conclude that their great grandchildren are also victims and deserving of reparations? Those great grandchildren are not victims. They're living in the best countries in the world. They are not victims. They are simply ingrates. They are ungrateful for the benefits that accrue to them by living in really good countries like Britain and America. So on the contrary, from Britain to the Caribbean, the descendants of slaves today have a far better and higher quality of life than they would have had their ancestors remained in Africa. And this is without a doubt, right? The lives of these former colonies, the life within these former colonies is far better than their home countries. And that's just a simple fact. Okay. And Ishan says, yes, I happen to agree with this. Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia owes Europe reparations for the Barbary slave trade. Yes. Why are we only talking about one side of this, right? And utterly forgetting the benefits that were brought by the British, by Britain spreading its civilization. And I mean, you guys have had jobs. I'm assuming you guys are upstanding citizens. You go to work, you come with a new idea, you figure out a new process for doing something at work, right? You say, hey, you know what? We can save time, money, and effort. We can make our lives easier by using this process to deal with this problem. And you know what you find? Someone at the office is a complete doofus. And that person gives you grief, or because we've always done things this way, they refuse to change. They see you as a threat. They see you as being someone who's going to usurp their position, someone who's going to make them look foolish. They don't see the value of your ideas. You've seen the opposition. Well, if I come into a country and I say, hey, we've got reading and electricity and medicine, do you primitive people want to try some of this stuff? They'll go, oh no, you're foreigners invading our land, we need to kill you. It's not like people go, yeah, that's a great idea. No, there's conflict. There's always resistance, even for the best of ideas. So it's not always that the Brits came in there and just started killing people left and right. No, maybe they landed on a primitive island and those people try to kill them right away. This has happened in countless places, right? With the best of intentions. You will come across primitive tribes who are violent, who are ignorant, and who are simply going to respond badly. So there's more than one side to that story. Moving on, let's see if I missed any good comments. Here where I live, baptism records show that former slaves centuries ago used to marry the relatives of their slave owners who was going to pay the reparations. Wow, Tony, that is fascinating. So the baptism records show that former slaves used to marry the relatives of their slave owners. That's very interesting. That does lead to a legal quandary, and we're going to be discussing that. Thank you. Yeah. So Sheikh, what do we have from you? Every part of the world, people have been on top and on the bottom. Forget the past and don't expect the innocent to owe you anything. Make your own life. And I agree. Now, what do we have? As much as I wonder where the ambulance chases are with regard to the COVID, where's the UN with regard to this? Yes, the UN, well, the UN is owned by China and the Islamic bloc. So, yeah. So, let's see. Deborah Irene, you're welcome. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you. She says, this is an incredibly important discussion. Yes, thank you. Ishan says, the British created the countries of India and Pakistan by uniting the hundreds of independent princely states, and also very much warring states. Let's continue. So now, on the question of reparations, we have to face two questions at least. Is a current descendant of a slave ethically entitled to benefit from their ancestors' suffering? So I can legitimately go to the archives in South Africa and prove that one of my ancestors came from Indonesia, of all places, right? Indonesia, as a slave in the 1690s, and indentured servitude, or whatever the case you want to call it, right? So that I come from ancestors who came. So my family descends from the 1690s from an ancestor who descended from potential slavery, right? Am I entitled to reparations? I mean, that's a lot of money. Where's this money going to come from, right? And who should pay? Now, here's the question. Who should pay? So this leads to another question. Is it ethical for an innocent person today to be culpable for the sins of their forefathers, right? So let me see. So Philip Thomas in the UK is white, and therefore he owes money for slavery 220 years ago. And he's got to pay it to some black guy who doesn't want to get a job. Is that fair? I'd say the answer is no. I'd say that is simply grift. That is simply someone just making hay out of guilt, right? So, yeah. Now, this CARICOM, this is the Caribbean body, these guys up here, are calling for reparations. and they want the British taxpayers to pay. So the question is, why? Why should you pay? What do you owe them? So again, out of a population of millions, there were only 3,000 slave owners in Britain. 3,000. So what percentage is 3,000 of 80 million people? You know, what is that percentage? Like, that's near zero. And they suddenly want all Britons, all Americans, anyone who's white, to pay this, right? To pay someone money, to just throw money away because why, right? So this is not going to fly. And of course, as we know, as any YouTube comments historian, and there are many very intelligent YouTube comment historians, will gleefully tell you of those 3,000 slave owners in Britain, 2,998 of them were Jews. I expect those comments to pop up very shortly. Someone will be happy to give me the numbers. In fact, of the 3,000 slave owners, 3,001 of them were Jews, of course. That's right. So what do we have here? Berber people claim where the word barbarian comes from, so they reject the word. Sorry, but the Romans called it. Okay, well, is that relevant to this? Okay, yeah, so moving on. Now, the vast majority of the population in Britain descend from people who lived in abject poverty and hardship, working in conditions akin to serfdom. So, do they all owe each other money? You know, so there's this. What you have is a very one-sided history that fails to recognize that you had people that were themselves living in poverty, people who themselves didn't have much, who had to go through society with very little. And over time, these societies, these countries, embraced good ideas, developed themselves, industrial revolution, and so on, embraced science, embraced good ideas, developed into wealthy nations. And they don't owe you money. They themselves come from great hardship and great poverty. You cannot simply point out some guy and say, you owe money to black people. No, maybe black people need to get a job, right? Try working for once in your life. Now, why should they, as taxpayers, pay reparations? These are legitimate questions. So you've got the issue of tort law, and then you've got these issues here, and there's more to that as well. So 16% of the British population is foreign born. They pay taxes in Britain. So why should they pay for reparations? So now you've got a guy from Ghana who's now legitimately British. He now has to pay some black guy on the street slavery reparations. So a portion of his taxes have now to go to pay somebody, right? Is he liable for this? Is some guy who moved there from India? There's a lot of Indians in Britain. There's a lot of Pakistanis. Are they liable for that? So no, this doesn't make sense. What about the descendants of slaves living in Britain today? Are they liable to pay for slavery? Why should people from Trinidad and Tobago living in the UK pay reparations to people in Jamaica? Are they liable? Because you're going to have to make a very strong case legally here, and this doesn't make sense, right? Then again, why is the demand for reparations always focused and framed in terms of Britain or the USA? Why is it always those two countries people are targeting? Why are no activists asking for reparations from the African states that were highly complicit in slavery? Not to forget the Islamic states that were highly complicit in slavery. Why are those states never fingered, never mentioned? Now, should these states not pay reparations? If slavery is bad, why is it that these states should be given a free pass? Can someone give me a reason? They provided the slaves that were transferred over the ocean, and millions more slaves were kept in slavery in Africa by other Africans. So, is it okay when black people do it? I guess we're going to be hearing answers soon. Now, this is the BBC News, right? This is July 2020. My Nigerian great-grandfather sold slaves. Okay, fascinating. Well, fine and well. Because yes, African nations were slave traders. So why does nobody ever actually speak about this unpleasant truth? African slavery is hushed up. African slaves enslaved other African tribes, enslaved other African tribes. They murdered, they killed, they had sex slaves, etc., etc. And yeah, the reason that their slave trade stopped was they were stopped by Westerners. So what about the Arabs and the Muslims who bought and sold African slaves for centuries? before the British arrived and continued to do so into the 20th century until the British and the French forcibly stopped them. What about African slavery that carries on today? This still is happening today. Let me just catch up with some of the comments and questions to make sure I'm not missing anything. So it's funny how Cassius Clay was originally named after an abolitionist, changed his name to two slave owners, Muhammad and Ali. Yes. Someone lied to me about Islam, that's for sure. So, but why only black people who live in America asking for money compensation? In ancient times, there were hundreds of slaves, and even today there are many slaves in Muslim countries. Well, don't forget the Irish were slaves. Now, people will try and tell you the Irish were not, blah, whatever. Let's continue. So what about African slavery that continues on today? Well, I don't see Greta Thunberg talking about Chinese pollution, Indian pollution. And 9 out of 10, okay, so if you look at the 10 most polluted rivers in the world, 9 of them are in Africa and Asia. Where's Greta Thunberg on that? Why is she not talking to these people in Asia and Africa? Because, I mean, would it be racist to highlight the simple fact that these people are polluters? No, I mean, you can only, I mean, Britain, let's say Britain puts out 2% of the pollution in the world and China does, I don't know, 20%. Why aren't you going after China? Well, hypocrites. That's why, because they're hypocrites. The International Labour Organization says that currently approximately 7 in every 1,000 Africans is a slave. This leaves us with 10 million people. That's probably a low estimate. In 2017, CNN reported hundreds of slaves are sold every week in Libya. And you know who we can thank for that? You know, she's married to Bill Clinton, right? So much energy is given to historic reparations and the historic plight of slaves. Why then is the practice of slavery by Africans and Muslims completely ignored? What is it with that? I mean, why would I want to take you seriously if you are going to ignore the mass of slavery and go on about something that happened in the 1800s? He bought me like a chicken. The struggle to end slavery in Niger. Al-Husseina Amadou was just one of thousands of girls in West Africa who was still bought cheaply as a wahaya, or fifth wife. Why a fifth wife? Does anyone know of any ideology or religion that has 4 wives and the guy can't get enough? I mean, look, man, quite bluntly, I think anyone who's had a girlfriend realizes it's tough enough managing one woman, dealing with just one. I mean, you know, why would you need a fifth one? Understand? So, yeah, so let's see. I mean, I could be wrong here, but fifth wife, this could be talking about Islam. I don't know why they don't mention it, because her name is Husseina. I wonder, is that a sort of an Arabic style name? Maybe Muslim? We were treated like animals, says Al-Husseina Amadou. Now we are free. Some estimates put the number of enslaved people in Niger at 130,000. So, yeah. So, yeah, she is undoubtedly a Muslim. This is going to be a Muslim nation. At least there's going to be a population of Muslims. So, yeah, Diana Culp says some of us can trace our ancestry back to white indentured servants and slaves. Would we be owed reparations in the current climate? Of course not. Well, I think you should be given. I mean, look, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. You know, all of this equality and nonsense. So these people need to step up and they need to, simply be, I don't know, equitable. So, but no, of course we know it's not about any kind of logic or reason. It's about simply shaming and destroying Western society, and it's hypocrisy from these people. So, that's kind of harsh, Nicodemus, but it's also, man, I know there are good Muslims in the world, right? They treat their wives well, they treat their families well, they treat their children well. I mean, this is true, obviously, but under the law, under Islamic law, the Islamic law, is as an entity on its own. We know what it says. We know how it is. So many Muslims are better than their prophet. They're better than their law. They're better than their Allah. They're good humans because they're following their conscience. So they do the right thing that way. Yeah. So, Sean, That country has a funny name, only a matter of time before white liberals cancel it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, let's have a look. So where's the outcry against black slavers? Nowhere, of course, right? But where's Greta Thunberg on any of, we would have more time for this argument if the people actively pursuing this whole reparations course of action were equally vocal about the fact of slavery by Africans and the horrendous plight of African slaves today. Today. Well, they don't care. There are more slaves in bondage today than crossed over the Atlantic. So I've done other shows on slavery. Look on my channel for slavery, right? Approximately, the numbers are roughly 350,000 to 500,000 slaves went to North America, which includes Canada. So that's a maximum, roughly 500,000 slaves went to North America. Today, you have 35 million black people in North America. Like in America alone, in the USA alone, you've got 33 plus million blacks, which means their population has gone up by 100 times. What they don't tell you is that something like 14 to 15 million black slaves went to South America, to those brown people, right? They don't talk about that, right? They don't talk about the black slave owners in the US. Why is that ignored? Black slave owners in the US who own thousands of slaves. Why is that not discussed, right? Because hypocrisy, that's why. And so there are more slaves today in bondage than crossed over the Atlantic. And why don't we talk about the minimum 20 million slaves that went to Arabia? Why don't we talk about the known 1.5 million slaves? The minimum, I mean, it could be 3-4 times higher, that was stolen by Africans from Europe. How many people from Hungary, Bulgaria, from Poland, from Denmark, from the UK, from Ireland, from Greenland, from Iceland was stolen, taken by Muslims, taken to Africa as sex slaves? Loads of them, over 1 million, right? And this happened over hundreds of years. They as someone mentioned earlier, the coastlines of many countries, like Italy's coastline, was barren for like 400 years because slave traders would come in and steal people. They'd steal whole villages, right? So people avoided living on the coast. I'm a warrior. Welcome. Zahar says the Zulu enslaved the Bantus. The Ashanti sold the enslaved to the slave trade. So where do we start? Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's point some fingers. I mean, if we're going to be doing this, let's just be consistent across the board. I mean, people don't realize like okay, so I can't remember the name of the tribe, but the Fengu. So there's the Koza, right? Nelson Mandela comes from the Koza tribe. They enslaved the Fengu, as an example, right? Why aren't you talking about how Nelson Mandela's tribe was slave owners, right? Carol B says Black Americans still think most enslaved Africans went to North America, whereas it was something like 3%. It's like what they know. Teachers don't teach the truth. That's the truth, Carol B, right? Teachers lie because, I mean, these colleges are churning out 95% crazy leftists, insane leftists. So Rafe does ask, where are the protests outside the Nigerian High Commission for their slavery? Where is it? Where are the protests outside the embassy of Niger, which has, he says today, 800,000 slaves? Now that other article said 130,000. Well, these estimates are all going to be lowballing it because, well, you don't want to say the truth because that would be racist, right? So Ishan says, we don't talk about the victims of Muslim slave trade because they're all castrated. No one left to cry about it. Yes, you don't have to pay reparations to people that are dead. Big brain move, yes. And he's Conociendo al Islam says even Mexicans took slaves from other tribes. People talk about the North American Indians, okay? The North American Indians were big time slave traders. They were genocidal maniacs. They were violent, territorial, genocidal, warlike slave traders. That is your North American Indian history. Look it up. These were not nice people in tune with nature, with the one spirit. No, they were violent slavers. They took sex slaves. Right? They abused women, children, murdered men. They murdered whole villages. They killed over territory. So yeah, we're sold the story that only white people bad, and yeah, I don't buy it. So Tony says there are no protests because it is easier to protest in your own country than to abolish slavery on another continent. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's people are just not being honest. Shaka Hollywood Hollywood made two movies about Shaka Zulu portraying their primitive warfare, superior in will and strength to the British Empire. Yeah, well, Shaka Zulu, he was another. He was the Hitler of Southern Africa at the time. Trust me, the man was. I should do a talk about that. I have some facts on him. It's just insane. The guy was just. He was just another. He was the Pol Pot of the era. He murdered half the population of what is today South Africa. Um, between him and Mzilikazi, I think they murdered half, 2 million people of a territory that had 4 million people. Between him and his buddy, who were competing, they murdered 2 million people. You know who stopped it? Those nasty white people. But who stopped it? Okay, so a lot of black people are alive because the white people stopped the black people from murdering the black people. But we can't talk about that, can we? Let's see. Carol says Sacagawea was a captive of the tribe she was living with. Okay, interesting. And actually, first legalized, according to Zahar, according to what I've discovered, yeah, the first legalized slave owner in the US was a black person. That's what did the Israelites do in Egypt? Well, they were slaves, right? So yeah, they were slaves. Ray Johnson says African nations often crashed after the Western countries stopped slavery. Yes, because their economies relied on slavery. Many of the African kingdoms relied heavily on the proceeds of the slave trade. Correct, Your Highness. Welcome, Your Highness. It's the same as the Americas. Indians, they slaughtered not long before the white men even got to the Americas. Yes, they were slaughterers in chief. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Even Northern American tribes bought African slaves from the Europeans. Interesting. Yeah, so it's not the Europeans' people's fault that Native Americans were anti-vax. Sneezes wiped them out, not guns. People try to claim that this was deliberate. I mean, white people also died from local diseases. I mean, it's just, anything that can turn into an accusation, they will. Doesn't matter how false it is. Freedom of expression says slavery is still practiced in Kuwait and other Middle Eastern countries. Yes, I've been to Kuwait. 2012, Stephen says let the truth out. So I'm aware, says there's still black-white feeling. Look, South Africa's on a decline, a very steep decline. There's a sense of despair in the country. When I was at home, it's changed. It's changed, and yeah, definitely not the place that I lived in before. Okay, to continue, what about Mali, Chad, Sudan, and Cameroon? Plenty of slaves there. Okay, it's almost as if there's an ulterior motive behind the call for apologies and reparations. Call it cha-ching, 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 free money, exclusively from Britain and the USA, right? Now, let's look at the Barbary white slavers, because these guys need to pay up. I happen to agree. They need to pay up. So Northern Africans, you guys need to pay up a little bit here, because man, oh man, the Barbary slaves, they ignored traffic in white people by Africans. That's interesting that, yeah, well, why are we ignoring this? If slavery is bad, okay, so as we know, these are famous pictures of white slavery. Let me just take this away. Let me just go back here. So we've all seen this, the Barbary slaves, they ignored traffic in white people by Africans. Is that okay? Is someone going to tell me, yes, white slavery is just fine, it's just okay? But if black people do it, it's all fine. Let's see. So how far should we take this specious idea, this really legally dubious idea for reparations? Should Britain seek reparations for the Barbary slaves? I say yes. I say absolutely positively yes. Why did the Marines get founded? Because of the Barbary slave trade. Because the Muslims were, because of the Quran, because of what they said was in the Quran, were attacking American ships. They were taking prisoners. They were taking slaves. They were taking money. They were plundering. That's why the Marines were started. America's first war was against the Muslim jihadists. Okay, to the shores of Tripoli. Well, slave traders. 1 million Europeans at the same time as Africans were going over the Atlantic, were enslaved by the Ottoman states of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. I'll say that again. 1 million Europeans at the same time as Africans were going over the Atlantic. Now, don't forget, we're looking at 350,000 to maybe 500,000 blacks that went west to North America. 15 million to South America. That's got nothing to do with Jimmy Jones in Chicago today, right? But shouldn't we be talking to these guys in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia? Like, pay up, dudes, pay up, because slavery's bad, and if white people are money for it, well, and so do you. Are you saying you get less money? Well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just pay up. It's slavery's bad. This slavery carried on after the abolition of the slave trade by the British. It had also started hundreds of years before. So let me see. These countries were practicing slavery hundreds of years before the Brits and a long time after. Many of the, as you know, Arab nations only ceased slavery, black Arab nations only ceased slavery in the 1900s, in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Why is that, I wonder, if there's no slavery in Islam, right? Should Britain demand reparations from North Africa? Man, I say yes. I say go for it. I say, hey, pay up. It's time to move on. That's what Rafe says. It's time to move on. But you know what? You know what? If we're all going to be paying each other money, what the heck? So colonialism benefits. Let's turn away from slavery and let's look at colonialism a little more broadly. Did I miss any questions? Conociendo el Islam says if we follow leftist ideas, then Spaniards, Portuguese, and Italians have to pay money compensations because they bought and sold many slaves. Well, yes. Okay. So, but then, dude, there was a lot more slavery happening in Africa by taking slaves from Europe than the other way around. Let's be blunt about that. All right. So let me see. Yeah. Carol B says, when all slavery ends, we can talk reparations for living former slaves. Well, yeah, we've discussed some of the legal aspects of that. Uzbekistan should pay to the Pakistanis Indians for the killing of 20 million. Well, I mean, if that happened, well, yeah. So when Horse says, dude, you know, Horse, you've got a picture of a mule, you know, so it becomes progressive reparations, similar to progressive taxes. Those who make less pay little or no taxes. Those who make more pay all the taxes. Well, the reason there's a progressive tax, this is a communist idea, because what they want is, so under Marxism, there are 10 major pillars of Marxism, right? One of those is the abolition of the family. But the other is that when you die, your children inherit nothing. That money is seized by the state for the communist dream, right? To be used for the betterment of all, for the greater good. So a progressive tax rate is a way to incrementally introduce a greater and greater tax rate, which ultimately robs you of all your money. So they would eventually add more. So remember, there was this whole death tax, right? There's the whole estate tax. This is a way to, you've already paid taxes your whole life, and now you die and you pass money on it, suddenly that gets taxed again. You've already paid tax on that your whole life, you invested it. So this is a way to take, it's a communist plot, quite bluntly, to take that inheritance and give as much to the state as possible so that, you know, I mean, you work it out. It's an entirely socialist move based on Marx's ideas. Okay, let me just take that away. So many of the former colonies of the Caribbean are now successful middle-income countries. What people don't realize is many of these colonized countries are very successful middle-income countries. Let's go back to the places where the slaves came from, and those places are S-holes, as we probably all aware. Okay. So what disadvantage has colonialism caused to those living in the former British colonies of the Caribbean, and compared to whom, right? So these former colonies are now successful middle-income countries. The GDP per head of the Bahamas is higher than Portugal, Greece, Hungary, Poland. I live in Poland, Malaysia, and is comparable to Spain and Italy. Let me say that again. The GDP per head of the Bahamas is higher than Portugal, higher than Greece, Hungary, Poland, Malaysia, and comparable to Spain and Italy. That's fascinating. And these same idiots are wanting Britain to pay them money, to give them free money, your money, if you live in Britain. No, you never hear that, do you? That these guys are actually doing really well. It's like, oh my gosh, those Europeans, they stole all our wealth. Well, these black people are stealing even more of your wealth. You need to go ask them for a little bit of money. So Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and other former British slave colonies have higher rankings on the UN's Human Development Index than Brazil, Mexico, or many other Spanish-speaking South American countries. Isn't that fascinating that these British colonies have a higher standard of living and a high GDP, better than other countries where they came from, or other countries where other people were running things. So yeah, you don't hear that. You don't hear how well some of these guys are doing. That's fascinating. Why is that? Don't they want to destroy their narrative? Okay, so let me see. It's not about facts, it's about cash. So how has the British Empire disadvantaged Caribbean nations? It's not clear how, since there seems to be a great deal of benefit to them, right? Let's compare the nations of the Caribbean with modern West Africa, the original homelands of the Caribbean slaves, to see what life is like. GDP per capita in Benin is $1,430, give or take, right? This is GDP per capita in Benin. Actually, you know what? Let's find out where the heck Benin is. I didn't look it up on the map. I did a bit of research, but my computer's got problems again. That's not going to happen. Okay, let me try and do it the hard way. Google. Nope. Let me try again. Darn it. Nope. Yeah, sorry. My computer is having issues. The GDP per capita in Benin is $1,430. Barbados is $17,000, over 10 times higher. Fascinating. Benin was a major slave trader, just so by the way. Life expectancy is Benin is 62, Barbados is 79. You live 17 years longer. Now, should we be writing checks to well-off areas of the world like Barbados? Beautiful areas of the world too. Why not focus on countries and areas that are impoverished and require aid, not attached to alleged attempts to cleanse your soul? This is what Rafe Mankul Haider says, or Haider Mankul says. Now, obviously, aid, I think, has been another abject failure because financial aid has not worked very well, has it? So let me see. Every single Afro-Asiatic countries have benefited from colonization. Educational institutions, railroads, railways, hospitals, legal systems, everything we've seen us from the West, exactly. That would be true. Just wanted to mention that the Latin name of the city of Cologne in Germany is Colonia Claudia Ara Agrippinensium, or in short, Colonia. Okay, it's a colony. So would that make it a Roman colony? Greece has been under siege for decades. Relentless mass media slander, bankrupting the historical 2004 Olympics, flooding of personal debt. Okay. Yeah, I don't know too much about that, so I can't comment very well on that. Okay, so let's see. Now, so the first rule of African slavers is we don't talk about African slavery. It's like the first rule of Fight Club. We don't talk about how Africans were slave owners and were massive in the slave trade. So here we have an African country reckons with its history of selling slaves, January 30th, 2018. Okay, in Awida, Benin, a man walks past the statue of Francisco blah, 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 major slave merchant. Benin was a hub of the slave trade, but many people want to forget their family's role. Now, you who had literally no role in the slave trade, who are just some guy, they want you to start forking over endless amounts of cash to pay some black guy who's never been a slave from some guy who's never been a slave owner, right? But here you've got people that are descended from tribes that were hugely into the slave trade, but they want to forget about it. Like, don't accuse us. Please look the other way. Ouidah Benin, less than a mile from what was once West Africa's biggest slave port, the departure point for more than 1 million people in chains. So yeah, I don't know, don't they owe some money to somebody, right? Now, oddly enough, there's a museum devoted to the family of this slave trader and a plaza in his name. Okay, every few decades, his descendants proudly bestow his nickname Chacha, on a D'Souza who is appointed the clan's new patriarch. So fascinating. So they celebrate their slavers. Slavery was abhorrent for those who were enslaved, yet had they stayed in Africa, the lives of the descendants would be worse. What exactly is Britain being asked to pay reparations for? Britain wasn't the first empire in Africa, in India, or in the Americas, but it was the most benign, right? So, I mean, if you look at some of the other countries that went into Africa, they committed some serious atrocities. The Germans in Southwest Africa, the Belgians in the Congo, there were some serious atrocities that did happen, right? And of course, then you can look at what Africans did to Africans, what North American Indians did to North American Indians, what Indians in India did to Indians in India. I mean, it's not very pretty, is it? The benefits from this colonization far exceed those of, for example, the Islamic and Indian empires that carved up India, of the Ashanti Empire, of the Dahomey Kingdom, we've mentioned them, and all of the hundreds and thousands of slaves that were ritually sacrificed every year in Benin. Oh, didn't? Oh, good grief! Why doesn't anyone mention that? That the Beninese were ritually sacrificing, murdering thousands of slaves to their gods. Okay, yeah. Guess someone just forgot to put that in the history books, right? Now, there's a thing called the Benin Bronzes. These are a series of statues. They commemorate those who owned slaves. These statues are considered valuable and important. Now, you know, at the moment in the US and America, US and other places, Canada and Britain and so on, people are pulling down statues to people who are considered, I don't know, problematic today. But here you've got those same white people, the same hypocrites, the same ill-educated, hypocritical white people who are pulling down statues of Lincoln, sorry, and in Columbus, and yet they want to protect these statues that commemorate slave traders in Benin who murdered slaves for ritual sacrifice. So now India. Now there's something about famine in India, so something to talk about as well. Okay, let's see, am I missing anything? Anything that's come up? Um, let's see. Zahar says every single Afro-Asian country have benefited from colonization. Yes. Okay, we've said that. Let me go up. Hey, just tuning in. Thanks for tackling this subject. As an African, I always thought the idea of reparations was quite silly. Thank you, John Business. Yeah, guys, look, if you enjoy what I'm doing, if you like the content that I'm producing, do please like, share, subscribe, you know, all those YouTube things. So just like the like button, you know, press the button and press the like button and press the share button and the subscribe button. And yeah, so Your Highness says, in Africa right now, there's still tribes that murder other tribes. Yeah, tribes hate each other. People don't realize tribes hate each other. Let me see. Am I missing anything? Silly question, but you never know. So is the okay, missed the question. Okay, so Benin, the new Aztec. Right, so slavery. And of course, look at this drawing. This is from 1595. This is before the Brits went into India. Few people realize roughly every 40 years or so, there was a massive famine in India. Maybe it was due to climate change. Maybe it was due to aliens and UFOs. Maybe it was due to mismanagement. Maybe it was a guy named Frank who came from Britain on a little rowboat, and because he was white, he caused famine just by walking around the place. Who knows? Okay, I'm guessing it was aliens. But the 1629 to 1632 famine in the Deccan and Gujarat was one of the greatest in India's history. In the first 10 months of 1631, an estimated 3 million perished in Gujarat and 1 million in the Deccan. That's 4 million people. Eventually, the famine killed not only the poor, but the rich as well. More famines hit the Deccan in 1655, 1682, and 1884. Another famine in 1702 to 1704 killed over 2 million people. So understand, long before the Brits showed up and brought, I don't know, things like electricity, shoes, railroads, education, books, and all that stuff to India, famine was a serious problem in India, killing a lot of people. And of course, now everyone's going to turn around and say, well, you know, India was peaceful and there was never a single famine until the Brits came, and then they started murdering people with deliberate famines. And maybe that needs to be examined a little bit better, because maybe famines have been a problem in India, and maybe the Britons solved the famine problem. Maybe if the Indians had, I don't know, cooperated a little bit more, maybe they would have solved the famine problem sooner with better farming methods, or maybe, I don't know, just more cooperation. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, you never know, right? But of course, everyone wants to go, we want to blame white people. So that's the whole, how can we blame white people today? That seems to be the whole shtick behind the left, right? As opposed to looking at actual history and saying, look, this is a complex issue. We need to get the facts here. The oldest famine in Deccan with local documentation sufficiently well preserved for analytical study is the Daji Bara famine of 1791 to 1792. Okay, let's continue. So why is there a celebration of the Benin Bronzes when they also commemorate slave owners? Why are the British apologizing for, holding on to statues that look, whatever, these are, melt the damn things. They belong to slave owners. Melt them. Seriously, if slave owners deserve no respect, then, but you can't do that. It's racist. Those things belong to black people. They're valuable parts of their history and culture. Wait, aren't you guys destroying statues of Columbus, of people that are famous? Don't you want to pull down statues of the Queen because of colonization? Sorry, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Should Britain apologize for introducing nutrition? and food storage policies that led to a decline in the Indian subcontinent's regular famines that happened every 40 years? I'd say no. I'd say celebrate it. The population of India rose from 170 million to 450 million because genocide. The Brits came in and caused a genocide that, just like the white people came to South Africa and caused a genocide of black people, which took them from 2 million to 45 million. So the black population multiplied by 22, which is called genocide. When you have one person and then you end up with 50,000, that's called a genocide because you genocided them. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. So the population of India rose from 170 million to 450 million over the course of the Raj because of medicine, health, and accurate and proper nutritional standards and food storage compared to how it had been. You know what? I really wish Thunderous had been here tonight. Oh man, he's sick, and really, honestly, I didn't want to postpone this again. But Thunderous would have provided some really good commentary. There'd never been such a surge in population growth in the history of India. So clearly, this whole growth in India is helped along by British technology, right? Let me see if I missed any comments. Ishan says Indians cry about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre done by the British in Punjab, but they casually ignore the Jhansi and Kanpur massacres done on British women and children done by Indians. Thank you for that. Yeah, there's always going to be more to the situation, more to the story that people are just leaving out because the message, right? The narrative, the lie. So okay, I don't know what much about that. Have I missed anything? Have I missed any good comments? Indians, this is true, Zahar. India's caste system is religious self-enslavement. India, holy moly, for those who've been to India, oh my God, the misery. There is a level of despair and poverty like I've never seen. I've spent a few weeks in India. I've been there several times. I've traveled through a lot of the country. It's horrific. Oh my God. I'm from Africa, man. I've seen poverty, but good God, this was a whole different level. This was the next level in human despair. It just was shocking to me. So there's never been such a surge in population growth in the history of India. And one can say the exact same about South Africa. South Africa was developed because of the Brits, because of the Dutch, because of the Portuguese, because of the French. They brought the Germans too. They brought their technology, their ideas, and they improved things. They improved things immeasurably. I mean, the contribution roughly of the black tribes like the Zulu and the Xhosa to Southern Africa is on a scale from 1 to 10, it's about -5 million. Okay? Seriously, on a scale from 1 to 10, the contribution of these tribal primitive black tribes is less than 0. Now, women's rights in India. Let's not forget what Britain did for women's rights in India. It is thanks to the British Empire that we have had the progression of women in Africa and India through society. India's history is one of female oppression. And I mean female oppression. It was the British who abolished sati, the burning of widows on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Yes, this is what they did. Now, do you think that the Indians went along with this and said, well, you're right, let's just go along, let's just do this? No, it's like a lot of Indians didn't like the idea. They liked burning women. They wanted to burn women. The Brits were like, maybe we've got to fight you. And sometimes this is what happens. You bring in an idea, say, hey, you know what? I've got a better way to do farming, and you guys won't die in the tens of thousands every few years because of famine and starvation and drought. We've got ways of water management and new farming, and the blacks go, these white people want to take our land, let's kill them. What do? You defend yourself. And everyone goes like, these bloodthirsty whites just came and randomly wiped out people and completely lie about the situation. The more facts you know, the more you realize the standard narrative is usually just a lie, and it's always a way to reframe things. White's bad, black's good, blacks walk on water. And let me tell you something. Yeah, that's not true. Okay, it was the British that stopped the infanticide of young girls, and it was the British who allowed Hindu widows to remarry. I think there's something to be said. Say thank you. Say thank you to the Brits for these things, for changing Indian culture. Otherwise, you would have the most brutal, depraved Indian practices today. Universities were brought into Africa and India by the British. There was no system of democratic legislators within these regions. This was brought by the British. If you're British, you should be proud. As Steven Pinker wrote, pre-state societies before the British Empire arrived were, on average, far more violent than even the most brutal of modern states. These were downright dirty, violent, evil places to be. And nobody wants to talk about it because that would be racist. So the modern success of Britain's former colonies today in the 21st century is due in large part to their colonial inheritance. They inherited things like, I don't know, electricity, schools, universities, education, medicine, farming practices. The English language and the common law enabled them to become global players. Their civic institutions, the police, the military, the civil service, the judiciary, parliament, universities, every region of the world you go to, British colonies are the ones most likely to be the most developed, the wealthiest, and the most democratic. This is true. Black civil rights activist and socialist Bayard Rustin. Now, I don't really care about this, but I mean, this is just saying what Rafe said in his talk. He was a friend of Martin Luther King Jr. and a posthumous recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama. And he once said, "If my great-grandfather picked cotton for 50 years, then he may deserve some money. But he's dead and gone, and nobody owes me anything." Actually, yes, I do care about this. So yes, this is right. Nobody owes him anything. And he's right. He was not responsible for that. He's not owed reparations, and you're not responsible for pain. You're not responsible for what happened to his father. But the world was a dirty, vicious, nasty place, and there's good and bad. And somehow people are telling you, only look at the bad. If you're white, hate yourself. Well, no. I say no. Don't. You need to get the facts. You need to say, look, sorry, you go hate yourself, go jump off the bridge if you like, but there's a lot of good. Okay, life is not that simple, but there's a lot of good, and I think we need to focus on the good as well as the bad. Life was complex, life was tough, life was brutal, but you know what? Things became less brutal over time. Society changed slowly over time, and we've got to accept the good with the bad. Let me see. Ishan says his ancestors were Brahmins and married within their caste. Christians didn't take part in caste discrimination. That's very nice to know. Even with that British bashing in India really surged with Hindu nationalists. Yeah. I mean, according to Hollywood, we all need to be like Gandhi, which would put an end to World War III and white privilege. He has his problems too, right? The guy was a little weird. Yeah, John Business says, "Had a Indian friend and his family practiced the caste system despite being Christian." Was shocking. Yeah, it's a little weird. I've got a really good Indian buddy. From Pune, and I've been there, and he's not in Bombay, but yeah. Satyam Thakur says, "Hey Lord, I love you, but there's a lot of nuance, Lord. A lot of nuance can't even begin." Yeah, there is nuance, but people try to also frame it's nuance, so therefore you can't come to an answer. There's no clarity, because it's just not possible to nonsense. The Portuguese band Sati in Goa. I've been to Goa, lovely place. Yeah. So let me see. Johannes says, "So what we can learn from the whole stream is that people have evil in their hearts, and we need a savior, and he came, and his name is Jesus." Yes, well, we people are evil. Horse says, "My father was stationed in India in World War II, and the level of human misery in Calcutta was beyond comprehension." Oh man, yeah, India is on another level. Zahar says, "The real damage was done by Islam. Continuous subjugation from 87-11 lasted until the British came. If the British didn't come to India, then India would have been a caliphate." I mean, yeah, it was pretty bad, right? Ron says, "Will you be doing a live stream with Thaddeus this month? I respect the work you do." Thank you, Ron. Oh, Ron. I'm doing one on Sunday. So I've been asked, apparently people have contacted him and asked him to do a stream with me about child marriage in Islam, because suddenly there's this whole spate, apparently, of people, Muslims, claiming there is no child marriage in Islam. And we all know that's not true. And I've done several shows on the topic. You can check my channel. And so Thaddeus has asked me to go back over that material of child marriage in Islam and child sex, infant sex in Islam. I mean, this is all perfectly legal. It's normal Islam. It's not radical in any way. Let me see. Horse says, "I thought the left is secretly, of course, all for eugenics and Malthusian solutions." Yes, they are. I mean, if they're socialist, yes, they are. They're anti-life. They are very much anti-life. Let me see. Ishan says, "As an Indian, I can attest that we hated each other for thousands of years before the Brits arrived. We can see that hatred used to only between India and Pakistan nowadays." Yeah. Malcolm says, if everyone in the world form a circle and pass money to one another, sooner or later we'd get back the money you originally had. reparations for everybody. Well, if the money came into my hands, the guy next to me might get a little bit less, right? Just a, if you gave me like $1 million, I might give him like $3 or $4 for his trouble, you know. Yeah. So let me see. Okay, missed all that. Yeah, we've got all that. So I think I've roughly caught up. No child marriage. How come in London I never see you hear a wedding? No child. Well, child marriage happens in Islam. It's perfectly legal, perfectly normal, and perfectly disgusting. The Indians from India sent to South Africa as indentured slaves for 400 years. Were they? I don't know. 400 years? I don't think so. I mean, I'd have to look into it. The thing is, we have to get the facts before. What do South Africans think of Gandhi? I mean, I guess everyone thinks he did some good. So, but look into his life. I mean, he's got some weirdness going on. The lower caste converted to Christianity remained as lower caste. I've seen this in South India. They have their own church. Interesting. Let's see. Carol B says this is why they push CRT. If there's no systemic racism, we're not forced into oppressed roles. Exactly. It's the same as the whole Marxist dialectic, right? You have to have the dialectic, the conflict of opposites, right? So yeah. Let's see. The British looted $45 trillion from India in the colonial past. I'm going to have to see some evidence for that. I'm going to have to see the receipts. Seriously, I am going to have to see the receipts. Because you know what? let me say this bluntly. The ANC have completely and utterly fucked up South Africa, my home country. Okay? They have royally and truly effed it up. And you know who they blame? Not themselves. The previous government stole all the money. They stole $45 trillion from the coffers, and there's nothing left. And we had to sell our kids into bondage and slavery to get money to run the economy. So my response to what you've written here is bullshit. That's what I think. You're gonna have to bring me receipts, or honestly, but on the face of it, I don't believe you. So let me see. Okay, so Ray Johnson says, though it may not be technically slavery, but North Korean women are being forced to marry Chinese men because Chinese men significantly outnumber Chinese women. Yeah, I mean, this forced marriage stuff, yes, this is known. Okay, so yeah, it's like Horst says, it's like the Biden admin trying to put all blame on the prior admin. Okay, so yeah, okay, so guys, I think this ends it. Right, that's it from me. Yeah. So there's a lot more complexity to the issue, but there are questions to be considered. There are facts that aren't being looked at, but there's clearly hypocrisy. There's a denial of the facts, denial of history, and there are things that happened that are not being looked at. And there's not an equal application of justice here. There's socialist justice. Yeah, you get that, which is obviously we hate white people, we hate the West, we hate anyone who's not a leftist, right? Who's not a socialist, who doesn't want communism. Yeah, that's socialist justice, and there's obviously a defense or an omission, lying by omission for what the communists had huge amounts of slavery. They murdered people in millions, right? Industrialized slavery and genocide. Then of course you had slavery by black people, slavery by Muslims, slavery by people who weren't white, and this gets utterly and totally ignored. America had slavery really for about 80 something years. Britain wasn't engaged in slavery, but the period of which they really got involved in slavery was very short, relatively speaking, maybe 150 years. And yet we're ignoring 1400 years of slavery in Islam. Right? You're ignoring all of this. So look, we have facts. There are things to be explored and discovered here and questions to be asked. And don't let yourself be shamed into guilt. Don't be guilty. Don't be shamed. And yeah, and look, honestly, this stuff makes me angry, right? This is my channel. I talk about the things that upset me. I talk about the things that really get to me here. This is what I want to talk about, things that I think are important. And yeah, I think, look, I know lots of people want to talk, well, if we just speak nicely to the bad people, if we just use pleasant words, they'll change the, you know what, in my job, previously my job was to make sure that person A didn't kill person B, and they would probably have to kill me to get to person B because I was in the middle. Trust me, when someone is about to pull out a weapon, that's not the time to have a pleasant conversation with him. That's not the time to go, well, have you got Jesus in your heart, because he's about to stab you in the throat and kill you. All right. So understand there's a time for pleasant words, and there's a time for punching someone in the throat and killing them if you have to. Right. And we have to realize there's a time for tough words, for harsh language, and for ugly facts, because the truth is not always pleasant, but the truth is necessary. And yeah, these are the things. I always say what I think is true. I think what I can verify on the basis of evidence. And yeah, I say blunt things. And so yeah, I hope no one is overly offended. If you are offended by me using the F word as I did about the ANC, because who are a bunch of communists who should all be in jail, then maybe you want to consider your life choices. So that's it from me, guys. What you said tonight about the UN is really intriguing about their financial backing. Of course, China and the OIC, the Organization of Islamic OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, whatever. They own the UN. The UN is owned by them. See my video series on the Arab lobby. See my series on the Arab lobby. People talk about the Jews and the Jews. Seriously, you need to look at the amount of money the Arabs are spending. The Muslim as a block, as a financial block, are spending on influence, on lobbying. You would be shocked at the amount of money that we just know about, and we know that the real amount is at least double. Is what we don't know, right? But seriously, these Arabs have way more money than the Jews will ever have because they're floating on oil, and there's a lot more of them. What martial arts do you know? I know karate, aikido, judo, kempo, and several other Japanese words. As for what martial arts I actually know, that was a joke. I've got some decent training. I can look after myself. I've had to on occasion. Let's put it that way. I still have my head attached to my body, not for lack of people trying to literally remove it with at high velocity. Let's put it that way. But so yeah, I've been there. Anyway, guys, thank you. And so yeah, I hope this has been enlightening. I hope it's been interesting. I hope it's given you food for thought. And yeah, so any questions, drop them in the comments, and I'll be back on Sunday on Thaddeus' channel. The Pipe System, yes, Sahat, definitely, most certainly. And yeah, Project Veritas did Undercover Peace and Emperor pretending to be terrorist, and they discussed how money dictates content. Yeah, yeah. And so interesting. Well, look, my job is to stop people trying to hurt other people. My job is not to kill people. I mean, that's not the nature of the job. Your job is to prevent violence, to predict, prevent. And when you deal with people, when you deal with issues, you stop them, you take them down. Your aim is not to draw blood. That was not my job. I was not a soldier. I was not a government agent. I might have been contracted to for various jobs, but you work as a private civilian. You're a civilian. You're a citizen. You are operating under the law as a civilian. You've got to keep that in mind. And yeah, so, but that doesn't mean that, I mean, look, trust me, I've been through dangerous situations. Yeah, I can tell stories. I know what it's like. I've been there. It's no fun at all. But yeah, I'm still here to talk about it. So guys, thank you all very much. I hope you guys have a good time, and we'll see you on Sunday. I'll be on Thaddeus' channel. Take care, guys. Good night.